I'm G.A. Solo. Hello. Allow me to begin by reassuring you that this is not a conspiracy theory video about how the government is trying to mind control you. Oftentimes when one hears of indoctrination, these are the images that come to mind. And because of this exclusive understanding of the term, indoctrination as a concept is less identified in cases where it unknowingly does occur. Indoctrination in its original sense simply means to teach or instruct, but over time it has developed a second definition. That is namely to imbue with usually partisan or sectarian opinions, ideas, points of view, attitudes, cognitive strategies, or even professional methodologies. So far, there's nothing of concern regarding these practices, as these are in fact hardly different from the definition of education. There is, however, one key difference between education and indoctrination as widely understood today: critical thinking, or rather the lack thereof. This is usually the main distinction between the two. Because the interesting thing about a person under the effects of heavy indoctrination is their unawareness of their state, because the teachings are usually taught as simple education on a matter, be it political, religious, societal, cultural, etc. And so such a person will travel through life having accepted these particular teachings as undeniably true, to the point of developing emotional attachment to them, and thus will remain completely unwilling to change them, or even hear or consider anything that may potentially change them. When such a person does hear challenging information or beliefs, they may show signs of hostility, sometimes out of anger, sometimes out of arrogance to not be wrong, sometimes out of fear of the prospect of doubting beliefs that have perhaps defined all existence in their perspective, because as we will see, sometimes people desire to remain indoctrinated. A key categorization I've made for the purposes of this series is the question of who is doing the indoctrination and to whom. The method by which such a state of mind can even become possible occurs in obvious and not so obvious ways. The obvious ways include the nature of education one receives at youth. If the nature of teaching methods discourages critical thinking or the questioning of ideas, it will result in the person developing thinking patterns that are limited to what they were at least partially forced to accept as true beliefs, facts, and views, and thus will only consider new information if it does not conflict with existing ones.
And history in one book from the viewpoint of the new regime, which is also subjective. This is more from our viewpoint, so they can compare the two and they can make their own opinion.
The town's syllabus makes no mention of Nelson Mandela, who they say isn't part of their history, a stronghold for Afrikaner culture.
Though it should be very well understood that indoctrination has nothing to do with age. A person of any age can become indoctrinated into believing anything. Now, a very important distinction between ideas or beliefs and facts should be noted here. When, for example, teaching mathematics to a young mind, questions are usually indeed encouraged for a better understanding, for as long as the instructor can demonstrate or prove that what they're teaching is indeed fact. This applies to the different sciences or branches of knowledge such as biology or history. Now, in these branches of knowledge, something that cannot be proven true according to the respective methods by which we obtain knowledge in different fields cannot be considered established facts by the same standards. They may instead fall into other categories that are not necessarily established facts, such as speculations, suggestions, ideas, beliefs, and so on. And they will remain so until they can be proven to be in accordance with reality. Now, the problem is that oftentimes, proponents of certain forms of indoctrination to certain ideas are not bound by these same standards. In other words, they have different standards of knowing whether something is true or not. And in fact, in some cases, whether something can be proven to be true or not is not even important. The emphasis is placed on simply believing that it's true. Their top priority, therefore, is that learners accept and believe what is taught, regardless of whether reality supports it or not. Now, groups that do value factual information have an even more powerful method of indoctrination because they present selective facts that they've chosen, along with their beliefs that are not based on facts. This ultimately leads to a conclusion that supports a certain narrative or set of beliefs, be it political, social, religious, cultural, etc. I'll present two examples. Nazi schools taught a wide range of education regarding what they considered to be subhuman races, such as Jews, Slavs, blacks, and anyone else Nazi ideology did not consider high enough in the racial hierarchy. The truly devious part about this is that they mixed facts with fiction that led to very unfortunate conclusions. A very controversial example of this is brain size. It has indeed been shown through various studies that there are differences in average brain size between different races, with Asians having the largest and Africans having the smallest on average. However, studies have also shown that this does not have a direct correlation to IQ and intelligence. In other words, brain size neither makes you more or less intelligent. Factors such as nutrition and environment have a greater effect. Also, the on average part must be greatly emphasized, as large fluctuations within a race obviously occur. Albert Einstein, for example, was Caucasian, and yet he had a brain size smaller than the average African brain, which is on average smaller than the Caucasian brain. That is, according to these studies anyway. And yet he is acknowledged as the greatest theoretical physicist of all time. Now, exclusively considering one fact, in this case brain size, without any other factors will definitely work in favor of a narrative in which one already believes, in this case a white supremacist perspective. And ignoring or denying the factors and studies that work against such a perspective leads such people to completely erroneous and dangerous conclusions. My second example entails the altering or misunderstanding of certain historical events to support a certain narrative. Consider the discovery of vaccines. Some Afrocentrists, for example, pinpoint the origin of the practice of vaccination to Africa. This is due to the exact same cognitive dissonance that Nazis had by considering only certain facts and ignoring or misunderstanding others. Allow me to clarify the story. A man known as Anismus was an 18th century slave who promoted the practice of variolation to combat the smallpox outbreak of 1721 in Boston, Massachusetts. He taught the procedure to his master, who accepted it and applied it to himself and his family, and soon the practice became popular in Boston, reducing the mortality rates from 17% to 2% in 1726. For the major part he played in introducing and promoting the practice that saved so many lives, he was acclaimed as the best Bostonian of all time by the Boston Magazine. Afrocentrists, however, exaggerate and misword the story to give Onismus and Africans in general undue credit by firstly claiming that he introduced vaccination rather than variolation, which are quite different. In brief, vaccination, which only came decades later, is the administration of a vaccine, which contains an agent that resembles a disease-causing microorganism, often made from weakened or killed forms of the microbe, to stimulate the body's immune system to become familiar with that agent, see it as a threat, destroy it, and repeat on any future microorganisms associated with the first. Variolation, the practice that Onismus introduced and promoted, not invented, used the same concept of inoculation, but specifically for smallpox by taking material from a diseased individual rather than a disease-causing agent and applying it to a newly diseased person by causing a less severe infection that will prevent the complete spread of the disease, usually after a few weeks. Now, variolation was indeed a precursor to vaccination and was indeed practiced in Africa long before Onismus introduced it in Boston, but it did not originate in Africa. The earliest practice of the sort originated in China and only spread through Africa due to traveling Arab merchants from Sudan, where a similar practice was conducted among Arab people. However, I should note that there are indeed lies and misconceptions circulated about ancient Africa, such as ancient Africans having not developed advanced agricultural techniques or their own currency, which is simply not true. But to likewise claim that Africans achieved things that they did not is equally erroneous. Both these examples have denialism as common factors, as it is common among indoctrinated people. It allows people to deny realities that are psychologically or emotionally discomforting. And communities in which people have a deep desire and disposition to believe in a certain narrative, people are prepared to believe in what is known as alternative facts, and consequently believe that everyone else is under delusion. Which leads me to the other categorization of indoctrination that I've made.
What do I do, Lord? Destroy the child, corrupt them all. This is their plan, people. These are demons. Just like the Bible says, it's basically an intergalactic invasion into this space through people. I'm telling you, it's what all the ancients said. It's what they warned of. It's what we're dealing with. They're demons. They're frickin' interdimensional invaders, okay? I'll just say it. Make fun of me all you want on CNN or wherever, but everyone already innately knows this. These people are not frickin' humans, okay?
Besides the matter of critical thinking, or the lack thereof, the line between education and indoctrination tends to depend on whether one agrees or disagrees with whatever is being instructed and accepts it as truth. This is because there is no universal agreement on most, if not anything, in the world. Of course, there is more agreement in things that can be easily proven, such as arithmetic, but even in knowledge that most of the modern world take for granted, such as the shape of the earth and the nature of the cosmos, is brought to question by some. By which case, therefore, the tables are suddenly turned against the population of those who consider themselves not indoctrinated and simply believing what they consider to be common knowledge.
Unless you can see these phenomena with your own eyes, they may not be true. A lot of people are going, this is
crazy, right? But think about this. For the last 25 generations, this is what we've told people.
And hence the rise of conspiracy theories, which I'll discuss in greater detail later in the series. But this is basically the reverse of what I've discussed, in that a minority of people are claiming that the majority of the human population is indoctrinated into believing what this majority accepts as common knowledge. The idea behind this sort of conspiracy theory is that schools and other institutions are also guilty of indoctrinating learners into believing certain arbitrary narratives about reality and are not giving alternative explanations consideration.
And my response to that was, if I personally were committed to enforcing decolonization, science as a whole is a product of Western modernity, and the whole thing should be scratched off, especially in Africa. So if you want practical solutions to how to decolonize science, we'd have to restart science from, I don't know, an African perspective, from our perspective of how we've experienced science. For instance, I had a question for all the science people is, there's a place in KZN, in Mkabialingana, and they believe that through the magic, the black magic, you call it black magic, they call it witchcraft, others, that you are able to send a lightning to strike someone. So can you explain that scientifically? Because it is something that happens
Though these groups tend to not consider that these alternative hypotheses are currently unproven, and so cannot be taught on equal grounds with what has been proven if we wish to progress in knowledge as a species. However, these days, people indeed see more justification for alternative facts, as there is a growing distrust for mainstream media due to the increasing blatancy of misinformation, bias, and political positioning in news outlets, movies, cartoons, documentaries, and so on. Now, a level of skepticism is always justified in everything. This is in fact the principle behind avoiding indoctrination in the first place. But skepticism is only reasonable for as long as it relies on reality to draw conclusions. But in many cases in today's climate, people simply don't believe a certain story because they don't like the reality being presented, and so no matter how true the story is, they deny it upon hearing it because it does not suit their belief, narrative, or position regarding a matter.
Trump said he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and get away with it.
No, I don't think so.
He did say that.
No, he didn't. No.
It's on tape.
No, I don't believe it. No, that's fake.
I swear to God, you can watch it.
Fake news, fake news, fake news, fake news.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
The other reason is because of the messenger, which is at a different degree because such people will not even listen to certain people telling a story because they've concluded beforehand that such a source will lie or misrepresent facts, or that such a source will simply not agree with them. And so people limit their sources of information to only the ones that agree with them, or tell them things that reinforce or affirm their existing position or beliefs, or denigrate positions or beliefs with which they disagree. This procedure is often known as being in an echo chamber. I'll go into this in greater detail later in this series. People tend to associate indoctrination with religion only. This is usually because religion and politics are the ultimate models of indoctrination on a massive scale. However, religious indoctrination has a very distinctive attribute. Politics physically affects people's lives and livelihoods far more directly than religion in places that are not under a theocracy. The authority in religion, however, lies in very distinctive concepts: sacredness and faith. When people consider something sacred, or at least more important than the physical world, they can be willing to sacrifice not only themselves, but also other people for the sake of not defying or going against their beliefs on a level far more intense than any other form of indoctrination. Because they act in an effort to achieve a greater good after this earthly life, or in an effort to avoid a greater punishment also after this earthly life. The problem is the second distinction, which is faith. It would be different if we had definitive proof that these beliefs are true, and thus justifying actions taken from them as an outcome. So far, we have no such definitive proof for any religion, and what's more, most religions claim exclusivity of truth. And so actions that would otherwise be considered unacceptable by the very people committing them, such as abandoning or disowning one's own family, committing massacres, or flagellating oneself, are all justifiable because such people have accepted a particular source of ultimate truth to govern them. And so it is a case of the Euthyphro problem, whereby the definition of what is good and evil lies in the ultimate chosen source. In other words, something is good because the source says so, regardless of the effects and consequences of what is being considered good, or if it can even be considered bad or detrimental by all other accounts. This is because of the attributes of sacredness that this ultimate source has been given. And so despite having been written by men, it is not accepted as the words of men, but of a higher power that has simply used men to convey his message. Of course, non-believers understand it to be the other way around, whereby men are attempting to authorize or authenticate their own words by claiming that it is from a higher power. More on this later in this series. But this concept of authority was also addressed in the Milgram experiment that was made to test how far people would accept to follow an authority, regardless of the nature of its demands. I have written this documentary series to encompass the various forms of indoctrination and examine them in detail. I will address manners by which it occurs, its effects, past examples of outcomes, and the psychology of our minds that makes indoctrination so easy to occur in the first place. I figured that a series such as this may have two types of receptions from people. One side of people may consistently apply this information to a particular group of people other than their own and regard themselves as completely exempt from these effects, while another side may realize that they may be under these effects but are so discomforted by the notion of seeing their beliefs differently, whatever they are, and will avoid watching. Both of these sides actually show effects of indoctrination as well, which is at least interesting. I cannot categorize everyone else, but I hope you enjoyed this series and perhaps learned something from it with me. I'm G.A. Sola. Goodbye.
You're a fake!
I told you children to keep away from here, I did. And the oracle told you to too.
There's no oracle, just an old man with a telescope.
The oracle has spoken.
People aren't dumb, you know.
Yes, they are.
Well, maybe some. But when they find out you're a hoax, they're gonna come after you.